Good evening, good people. We're so glad that you're here with us tonight, and we're going to get started in just a minute. Let's take a moment as people are getting in here and getting comfortable to give some love to the team that makes this call happen. This is more than just checking a demographic box for us. This is about making sure that all of us have access to learn from and with one another and build the power of our people. Thank you for making this more possible, interpretation team. Can we give it up with some reactions, some emojis, some hearts in the chat so we can see the love for our interpretation team? We're so grateful for you all. And shout out to On Point and all the tech, comms, the design crew folks, every single organization that co-sponsors, and all of you for getting folks on the call tonight. Good evening, and welcome to this mass call to process elections and our feelings. Be reminded of our work in this time and to learn together. We're in the final sprint to election day, y'all, and events are coming fast and furious. As we've been doing for many months now since April, this mass call is our chance to take a step back as a movement and examine where we are. We want to look at the current events, but we also want to look past the punditry and put this election in this moment in a bigger context. So thank you for prioritizing the call tonight. Holler at your folks real quick, text them, shoot them some messages on Instagram, on Facebook, on whatever social media you use. Tell them to come on and join us. Today, we're going to be hearing from people that are on the front lines of our movement about the work that they're doing in this election and what you can do to do your part. We're also going to try to understand our work in the field right now as a deposit that we're making to build the movement and the voting electorate that we need to make structural change in this country now and in the future. Because we may be running to get to November 5th, but we're also on a long march for freedom. I'm Ashley Woodard Henderson, your host tonight. Welcome to folks who haven't missed a call. We see you. I see you in the chat. I love you. Thank you for coming back. For all of our new folks, we also see you, and we are so glad that you've joined us. Make sure you tell us in the chat that it's your first call. If you're watching on Zoom, use the chat to say hello and where you're calling in from. If you're repping an organization, feel free to shout them out. Also, shout out to our folks that are watching on Instagram and YouTube. Y'all feel free to use the comment section to do the same. And I'm sending special love to our folks who are watching the recordings later. One thing before we get into tonight's program, we should just be clear as per usual that when you fight for justice and liberation, there's always going to be some haters. The more visible our work is, the more they come after us. It's certainly upsetting, but we won't be surprised if there are trolls on with us tonight. If you see any hateful messages in the Zoom chat, I just want to ask you to flood the chat with solidarity and love and other positive messages. We remember that we can disagree without disrespecting each other, and I promise you that we're looking in the chat as well, and we'll make sure to handle it. There's a consistent truth in the work of organizing to confront people who consistently abuse power. And the truth is this: people abusing power typically accuse you of the things that they themselves are doing. Psychologists might call it projection, but whatever you call it, we recognize this behavior in the wild. We recognize it when we organize to call out white supremacy and structural racism, and people collapse back into a flimsy argument about reverse racism. We recognize it when we make a fundamental claim to value Black lives and are told that all lives matter, as if to say that by asserting sovereignty over Black or brown bodies, we are somehow robbing others of theirs. Or maybe we recognize it from our fight to protect the right of women and other people of oppressed genders to make choices about their reproductive rights. We fight for access to safe and legal abortions so that no birthing person in this country has to bleed out in a parking lot in their car. And for this, politicians, usually men, usually white men, imply or outright call us murderers. We recognize it because we have been part of a process to organize a union on the shop floor. When our boss finds out, he accuses us and our coworkers of disturbing the idyllic family atmosphere of the place, never once looking in the mirror to examine the reality of the work environment that they themselves created, never once engaging with us and our coworkers on the level of honest respect. Or we recognize it from times where we've organized in our neighborhoods to fight city halls, or in our building to take on a landlord who won't fix things and keeps raising the rent. In all these cases and some, the person in power has thrown our desire to make life better for us and our families back in our faces. They have tried to make us feel like it was our fault, not theirs, that these problems exist. We're now in the final week before the election. There are just 6 days until Election Day. Whew, just saying that makes me want to stop and take a breath with y'all. So let's do that. Let's breathe in through our noses and let that breath out through our mouths. Let's feel the environment around you, the safe place that you're calling in from. Feel the earth supporting us in this moment. Take another deep breath in through your nose. And let's breathe out through your mouths. We are 6 days from Election Day. And yet we know that this fight is not over on November 5th. We know the results likely won't be clear on election night, and that we're going to have to hold the line to make sure that every single vote gets counted. We are going to have to be vigilant every step of the way. We know that our opponents are preparing to accuse us of all kinds of nasty things. How do you know this, Ashley? Well, we know this because they're already doing it. They're saying that we are trying to steal an election. They're saying that we are part of a conspiracy to subvert democracy. They're saying that we are the enemy from within. They wouldn't be saying any of this if we were just rolling over and letting them advance their openly authoritarian program. They'd be fine to leave us alone if we didn't call out their openly racist words and deeds. And they would have no problem with us if we just ignored the fact that theirs is an agenda based on the belief in oligarchy, where billionaires like Elon Musk think they can buy an election and dominate all of us. So as we gear up for the fight ahead, let's hold in mind the ideas of Brian Martin in his article called How to Counter Trump's Efforts to Reduce Outrage. We're going to drop that in the chat. He talks about the kind of organizing we need to do to make the gaslighting by these powerful people backfire in their faces. First, we need to reveal what's happening. They will deny, they will spin, they will cover up. We won't let them. We need to redeem our intrinsic value and the value of those in our communities. We will let no one tell us we are garbage or worthless. We need to reframe their actions so people understand these are not just a few bad apples, some harmless jokes, or people who went off script. This is systemic, and these people represent that system. We need to redirect away from being co-opted into their processes and arguing on their terms. And we must never, ever, ever stop organizing and mobilizing our own people's power. And we must resist the efforts to threaten or bribe us. If we do these things, we will make their efforts to shut us up backfire. Tonight, we're going to be specific about what we can expect from Trump and his loyalist plans to try to subvert this election. As we go through this, we need to step into our agency and remember that there are no institutions that can stand on their own, y'all. There are no referees that are going to intervene to say what they're doing is unfair. It's us. We are it. We have done this before, and we can do it again. I believe that we will win. I need y'all to say that with me because I don't believe that y'all believe it. So if you're in the chat, if I can see your face on the screen, I need you to say it with me. I believe that we will win. Drop it in the chat. I believe that we will win. I believe that we will win. I see y'all. I see y'all. We can do this. So we're going to say some things that are going to be stressful because we're talking about what their team is doing. But we are going to do this work. We're going to blow it out. So let's get to it. There are many things that you can do right now to plug into this collective work to ensure that we control the terrain in which we continue to build our power. If you haven't already, I'm going to ask you to text the words mass call, MASS space CALL, mass call, 2 words, to the number 30403. Text mass call to 30403 for a list of the ways that you can take action. We urgently need you to deploy to a swing state to knock doors with Seed the Vote. New Yorkers, we got New Yorkers on the call. I'm looking at y'all. Can you hop a train to Pennsylvania? Folks that can get to Arizona, Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, I'm looking at you. I need you all to sign up to go hit these doors, to support a phone bank, a text bank, or build a wolf pack from home. You can sign up with links that you receive by texting mass call to 30403. Now, let me remind you what we're doing here. These mass calls are being hosted by the Working Families Party and highlighting WFP member organizations and leaders from across the country. As always, we want these calls to be grounding, to provide you with information and strategic orientation from movement leaders that you can trust, and to give you concrete things that you can do to get off that noisy hamster wheel of information and misinformation that's being thrown at you and put you back into power building actions. Y'all know we've got this call coming up on November 7th where we're going to talk about what happened after the election. You can get the link when you text mass call to 30403. You can also pull it from the links that we're dropping in the chat. We're going to keep the channels open to call together our mass call crew as needed to update about conditions on the ground and what you can do to see our collective work through as needed and necessary after the election. So make sure that you've texted mass call to 30403 so that you can get the bat signal to gather again when it becomes necessary. I'm going to remind you again that immediately after the election, we're going to get on a call on November 7th and prepare for whatever is next. And if you go to the Mobilize link, you'll also see that we've already added some dates. So you can go ahead and RSVP for those dates. If we don't need them, we'll cancel the call, but it is very likely that we will. So please make sure you go on and register for the upcoming calls. And here's what we're going to do on tonight's call. First, as always, we're going to do some political education on our block and build strategy. And then we're going to have a panel of movement leaders, experts, researchers, movement lawyers, all sorts of dope folks who are on the front lines of election defense. They're going to talk to us about the organizing work, the research, the advocacy, and the work that they're doing to talk to voters about what's at stake in this election. As always, we're going to give you some concrete ways that you can plug into this work and take action. Because we don't learn how to be strategic to just have a better analysis than the other guys. We learn how to be strategic, to put into practice, and to build power. All right, fam, let's get into this good learning. So for this political education session, we're going to talk about blocking Trump and his MAGA loyalists from carrying through on their plan to subvert our election. Before we do that, if you like what you've been hearing in these sessions, or if you want to get caught up on things that you might have missed, if you missed a mass call previously, we're posting the recordings on the WFP website at www.workingfamilies.org/mass calls. Again, we're going to drop that in the chat, but for folks that are listening, www.workingfamilies.org/mass calls. We'll drop that link in the chat. And here's the cool thing. You can do more than just watch the videos. We've put up downloadable versions of all of the slides and all of the speakers' notes for these political education sessions right there on the website. So again, you can find those materials at www.workingfamilies.org/mass calls. We'll drop that link for you in the chat one more time. And before we get into the details of what could happen between the election and Inauguration Day, let's just remind ourselves of who we're dealing with here. At his core, Donald Trump is weak and he is deeply insecure. Every single one of us on this call knows somebody like Donald Trump. Maybe we grew up with them and they were the bully on the playground. Maybe they're a coworker or a neighbor or a family member. The point is, there's a certain type of person in the world who is so deeply unhappy and has so much self-loathing that they need to tear down everyone else around them for their own gratification. We can trust them only to look out for themselves. And though their behavior can be ridiculous and to some people laughable, some of us might feel a sense of compassion or maybe pity that someone goes through life carrying such pain that they are unable to do anything but hurt other people. When these people are our family members, we do our best to love and support them or keep our distance if we have to. But when this person has power that they so consistently abuse, we all know that they can be dangerous. We don't have to convince anybody on this call that Donald Trump is quite dangerous. If you are a normal person capable of feeling human emotion, then talking about this stuff can naturally raise your anxiety levels. It certainly raises mine. We don't talk about Trump's efforts to subvert our election because we're gluttons for punishment. We certainly don't do it to say that there is no chance of us winning this election. There certainly is, and we need to stop the literal or figurative doom scrolling that might lead us to think otherwise. The reason we talk about this stuff is because we need to introduce ourselves to the possibilities that could happen so that we are able to fight back against it properly. If the fighting time comes, and while we're contemplating the ways that Trump and his people might steal this election, the moment that they start to do it, if that's when we start thinking about what we ought to do, it's already too late. We run the risk of being shocked. We run the risk of being demobilized at the very moment that we need to be calm, we need to be clear, we need to be acting with clear leadership and determination. In 2020, we prepared in this same way. And thanks to this, our movement was part of the united front that blocked Trump when he was actively trying to subvert the clear outcome of the vote. Y'all remember, we were all together. Fortunately, way more people are aware of what Trump is capable of in 2024 than they were back in 2020. But that doesn't mean that we are fully immune to what could come in the next weeks and months, because Trump's narcissism and his violent authoritarian instinct has continued to mutate and take new forms. He and his people have continued to organize. And just because we beat them last time is no guarantee they'll be beaten again if we don't do everything in our power to make it so. Now is the time, y'all. Now is the time for us to press onward with everything that we've got. We need to stay vigilant. And for that reason, we're going to consider for a bit a worst case scenario. If we are mentally and physically prepared for this scenario, we will be prepared for anything. We are fully aware that the first step of Trump and his MAGA loyalists is to sow doubt about the integrity of our election. To hear them tell it, it's more believable that there is a massive 50-state conspiracy composed of the election guardians of our state-based electoral infrastructure, combined with armies of malicious citizen volunteers who hand out I voted stickers and public servants who count votes. In their world, it is more likely that there's a secretive cabal of agents conspiring to allow people who are not eligible to vote at an industrial scale. This cabal is made up of everyone from your mailman to the ghost of Hugo Chavez. To hear them tell it, this grand conspiracy is more believable than the simple explanation that what we're dealing with is a deeply narcissistic white man who is unable to accept his failings and therefore leverages his individual power to get his way. So, having gaslit a small but noisy percentage of Americans into believing in this grand conspiracy, Trump plans to step into the breach and declare himself the winner on Election Day, no matter what the votes say, no matter how many votes remain to be counted. This is not speculation. This is literally what he did in 2020. And everyone, including his allies, expect that he's going to do it again in 2024. Then the wannabe king is going to turn his attention to pressuring election boards. He'll file more lawsuits and injunctions. The point of these isn't to win, but to gum up the works and to sow more chaos and doubt. If he can delay the process of these boards certifying election results and cause them to miss deadlines, this strengthens his hand for the end game as he sees it. But more on that in a second. Trump's plan will then move to the state legislatures and governors, and there may be a power struggle between them. Let me break that down. You all remember that Vice President Mike Pence famously refused to recognize the fake Trump electors that had come from some states, thus blocking Trump's attempt to bend the federal government to his will. However, a little noticed detail from that story is that Pence's own legal team actually argued that he would have to recognize those electors if they'd been designated by their state legislatures. John Eastman and Kenneth Chesebro, two of Trump's attorneys who were found guilty of their efforts to subvert the election, argued that state legislatures could overturn election results if they lacked faith in them. Eastman still claims this to be true. In 4 of the swing states, both chambers of the legislature are controlled by Republicans. In 2020, state legislatures, even those controlled by the Republicans, formed one of the first lines of defense against Trump's subversion efforts, which meant that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and other loyalists had to resort to increasingly theatrical methods to identify fake electors. The question is whether state legislatures will hold firm in 2024 like they did in 2020. It will all depend on the kind of pressure that they feel and who it's coming from. On the other side of the ledger, 5 of the 7 swing states have Democratic governors. The federal law that governs how this process is to unfold was recently amended by Democrats to close loopholes that Trump tried to exploit back in 2020. One thing that Congress did when they amended the law is state that it's governors, not legislatures, who have the actual power to make the final determination on who the electors from the state should be. So what we're looking at is the potential for a power struggle between legislatures and governors. All of this could end up in the courts. And even if it all goes nowhere, it still fits neatly into Trump's narrative, which is designed to sow chaos. So where does Congress come in? Well, the first thing to say here is that it'll be the new Congress that administers the process in January. So this guy, Speaker Mike Johnson, could be in the minority by then with very little power to do anything. But if Republicans were to hold on to the House, it's also the case that given this Republican Party, they might have a different speaker again. For the worst case scenario, let's assume it's Mike Johnson. Johnson, of course, made a mark in his career by being one of the people in Congress who actively supported Trump's claims of a stolen election in 2020. So what's the worst case scenario? There's a narrow path, and certainly not an easy one, that Trump could follow to overturn an election result he does not like via Congress. It would start with Republicans retaining control of the House. It could escalate if Trump and his loyalists spending November and December increasing the pressure on the state legislatures of, say, Wisconsin, Georgia, or North Carolina to send delegations of fake delegates to cast votes for him, even if the popular vote went the other way. He would, of course, do this in the context of the distrust that he and his allies have been sowing in the election for months. Kamala Harris, in her role as sitting vice president, would oversee the process on January 6th. But the process itself would happen in the House chamber. Johnson is playing coy, saying only that he'll follow the Constitution. But he's not saying whether he means the interpretation of Trump lawyers who believe the Constitution gives state legislatures the rights to overturn the popular vote, or whether he means the opinion of the mainstream legal community who does not believe state legislators have that power. In other words, Johnson's refusing to say whether he thinks the Electoral Count Act, which is a law passed by Congress and amended by Congress, is actually binding on Congress. In this situation, Speaker Johnson could force a constitutional crisis. He could force votes in the House on slates of fake electors and lobby behind the scenes for people to accept the fake electors. He could allow hours of conspiracy theory-laden debate on the House floor to prevent a vote. Or he could just gavel Congress out of session. In any of these situations, there would be huge, ginormous legal battles. And these battles would quite likely end up in front of the Supreme Court. If through all of these, or neither, if through all of these scenarios that neither candidate is able to secure a 270 delegate majority of the Electoral College, then it would trigger something called a contingent election in the House. Each state delegation would get 1 vote. Republicans control 26 delegations. Democrats control 22, with 2 others evenly split. So in this theory, this means that the Republicans can force a situation where there's no clear Electoral College winner, and then they use their slim majority to vote using an alternative procedure, which has only been used 3 times in 1801, in 1825, and in 1837. So this is getting wild. It would take Republican office holders breaking under the pressure of a wannabe dictator, and it would take brazen and open lawlessness on the part of people in deciding roles like Mike Johnson in Congress or people in similar powerful positions in the states. In short, this would absolutely be a coup. Okay, shake that off. That was a lot. Let's take a deep breath in through your noses and out through your mouths. Again, we don't go through this to raise alarm unnecessarily, but I think recent history has shown that we should not take any of this for granted. And again, if we only start thinking and planning for the details of an attempted coup like this, when it's already happening, it'll be too late. So let me tell you about some good news. First, Trump is not the sitting president. Unlike in 2020, when he had the vast power of the federal government at his disposal, when he tried to pressure the Department of Justice to bend to his will, and when he had the advantage of being able to lock the doors of the federal bureaucracy from the inside, he's not in that position now. Second, the federal law that spells out how a presidential election should be conducted has been amended by Congress to remove many of the ambiguities and loopholes that Trump tried to exploit in 2020. For Trump to be able to overturn an election result he doesn't like in Congress, he's going to need Republicans to retain and possibly grow their majority in the House of Representatives. So just in case you were sitting there thinking to yourself that these down ballot races don't matter, you should reflect on the role that both the balance of forces in Congress and in state legislatures means for this process. Vote down ballot, y'all. Get your folks to vote down ballot. All roads lead again to January 6th. This is just 3 days after the newly elected Congress will have taken office. And finally, even though Trump is powerful, he can't do any of this on his own. While we can't rely on the system holding it by itself, especially after it was strained to almost breaking the last time, there are people and institutions along the way that have to go along with Trump, and they are subject to public pressure. Now, the alternative to that news is that Trump and his loyalists have spent the last 4 years preparing for this moment. They've learned from the past. Over the last 4 years, Trump did not receive consequences for his actions to overturn the election in 2020. He's desperately motivated to make sure that that stays the case. Trump's campaign to sow chaos has gotten more sophisticated. In our last mass call, we talked about the role that the Heritage Foundation is playing to create the narrative at the level of the political elite in Washington, D.C., that there's a widespread conspiracy to steal the election from Trump. It's also the case that Trump's ground troops are not deterred. They may be regular activists, or more frighteningly, the people who are connected to violent underground organizations and militias. And they're talking about planning their next coup attempt. And finally, we don't know what we don't know. That may sound obvious to some, but think of it this way. In 2020, we all prepared for Trump to steal the election. They tried at election boards and counting facilities, and we were ready. They tried in the courts. We were ready. They tried to sow their narrative in the media, and we were ready. And yet far too many people were still shocked when Trump loyalists resorted to violent insurrection on January 6th. Are we ready if an election worker gets hurt? Are we ready if a group of people breaks into a county clerk's office and burns ballots? Are we ready if a militia occupies a state capitol? If National Guardsmen defect? We don't know what the details will be of the thing that shocks people, but we should be prepared for something to be shocking, no matter how much we prepare. So we need to expect the unexpected. And throughout it all, we need to keep our minds, our bodies, our spirits firmly grounded. We need to not believe and spread rumors, and we need to lean into our organization and relationships, which is the source of our power to get us through this. Okay. Now I want to shift gears a little bit and break this kind of scenario down into some basic ingredients. We've maybe felt the feelings of what a scenario like this could create. And now we want to understand the details of how they might try to steal the election on a more technical level, including a key concept and the timeline we need to work with. A core concept I want everybody to remember going into this election is that there's a margin of contestation. What does that mean? Simply put, it's the gray areas between a clear election victory and a loss. The bigger that gray area is, the more room there is for funny business to happen. And obviously, the more we do the work to turn out the vote and win by a lot, the better off we're going to be. The margin of contestation is more than just numbers. It's about perception. This perception will be determined by what the candidates and their campaigns do. And we already know what Trump and his campaign will do. The media narrative will play a big role. In 2020, much of the win was taken out of Trump's sails when Fox News called Arizona for Joe Biden. This public narrative of what is going on is going to be critical, and we have to do whatever we can to shape it. And this is where all of us come in. The degree to which we are prepared to be in the streets, if and when needed, is going to make a big difference, because how the details shake out during this gray period is going to be determined by the court of public opinion. So this is that time every 4 years when we also learn about the Electoral College, the current system that we have of electing a president in the United States. We, of course, know about the Electoral College's roots in the founding of this country and the desire of states that enslaved Black people to protect the institution of slavery. We can have a deeper conversation about that at another time, but what I want to talk about today is the technical side of how they might try to subvert this election via the Electoral College process. So, the most basic understanding of the Electoral College is that each state has a certain number of electors. There are 538 of them all together, and a presidential candidate needs 270 of them to vote for them in order to win the presidency. States each have the ability to determine how those electors should vote, but in every state, they've passed laws that the electors should vote in accordance with the will of the popular vote in their states. In a normal election, the process is pretty ho-hum. State election officials count the ballots, the governor certifies the results, and then the electors gather at their state capital for what is usually a ceremonial event. These electors are usually local party celebrities or leaders, and doing this is understood as both an honor and a civic duty. In a contested election, the governor may not be able to certify the results because of the legal challenges, or the legislature may decide to pick a fight by trying to take the power to certify the electors out of the hands of the governor. This could provoke a crisis that could force the issue to Congress. Let's get even more specific. Let's talk about how the timeline of how all of this can play out over the next couple of months. Here's a look at the overall timeline. Election day is, of course, on November 5th. Then there's a little over a month that's going to go by where election disputes could be filed and resolved by December 11th. The electors will then meet in each of their state capitals to officially cast their electoral votes for president on December 17th. The results of that vote need to be sent to Congress by December 25th, and then Congress certifies those electoral votes on January 6th. So the very first scenario we have to prepare for is one that we have already seen before. We expect Trump and his lawyers around the country to file as many disputes as possible to disrupt the counting process. Again, the goal here is not really to win these cases. Rather, they're trying to gum up the works and add to the narrative that the election was stolen. Their hope is to push this process past that deadline of December 11th in order to create more daylight for them to pressure legislators to act against the will of their voters and or to act before the will of their voters is even known, is actually known. This gives them the space to try to name a group of fake electors. So this means that after November 5th, the next big deadline for us to be tracking is December 11th. We need to be ready to push back quickly and decisively against these efforts to gum up the works and prevent the votes from being counted by this legal deadline. It's not really being debated anymore that there could be violence in this year's process. January 6th from 4 years ago put to rest any idea that Trump and his loyalists are above taking it this far. We need to be prepared for that violence to happen earlier in the process and to be more diffused than one large protest in Washington, D.C. A place that many experts believe is particularly susceptible to political violence are the meetings of the electors on December 17th. In the past, these meetings would have happened in public and ceremonial places like the rotunda of a state capitol building, but already because of credible threats, many states have decided to take more precautions. Still, this might not be enough. We need to be prepared in states to deal with this kind of disruptive, disturbing, violent disruption. Whether we're talking about protesters who get out of control or militia groups with premeditated plans for violence or both, we don't know. But these state level processes present the kinds of soft targets that may be particularly vulnerable to attack. So to summarize, here's what we should expect the tactics of Trump and his loyalists to be. They're going to try to create a sense of chaos. We need to be prepared to get and stay grounded. We need to not believe or spread rumors and lean into our organization and relationships to counteract this. We need to challenge those narratives if they start to infect media coverage or if pundits start to engage in both-siderism. What does that mean? What's both-siderism? Well, that's the idea where the opinion of a public servant trying to administer the law and count the vote in a professional and politically neutral way is held up as one opinion, and the politically calculated talking points of right-wing PR professionals are held up as another opinion. We need to let elected officials and state legislatures know that we are watching what they do. We need to raise the price for elected officials now if they're trying to aid and abet a coup by forcing vote counting to be stopped, or by naming fake electors, or by otherwise meddling in this process. And we need to be prepared for attempts that they'll make to use violence and intimidate to bend the system to their will. So what things should we be keeping in mind as we think about our own game plan? What should be in your survival toolkit? Well, let's look back at the timeline. We need to be aware of the phases that we're going to go through. At first, it'll be about local work to make sure that vote counting processes continue. But as we move into December, the battle lines are going to start to shift. After the window is closed for disputes of ballots on December 11th, then attention will turn to which electors are going to get sent to Congress. We will simultaneously need to be keeping our eye on that process of selecting delegates and preventing any effort to select a slate of fake electors. And we'll need to be letting Congress know that we're also watching what they do. And even though we almost certainly won't know this on election night, if we're in a situation where the election does get called for Kamala Harris, then we need to claim victory, and we need to keep claiming it. We need to celebrate what we've accomplished, and we need to make sure that through our joy and through our vigilance, that these election subversion zombies are dealt with once and for all. The moral of the story is that the more that we do right now to make the electoral outcome obviously in our favor, the harder it's going to be for them to steal the election. So I need you today to make that vision, that hope, that faith that we have that we can win a reality. How can you do that? Well, we're going to drop those links, those calls to actions back in the chat. I need you, if you're new to this call and you have not yet texted mass call to 30403, I need you to do that. I need you to RSVP for our next mass call on November 7th. And I need you to take these actions. Lead your wolf pack. Join a canvas. Get to these swing states with Seed the Vote. I need you to join a phone bank or a text bank. You can canvas. I need you to get into the work. This is a time for us to take that little bit of energy we've got stored up for the last week and throw down to make sure we've left it all on the playing field. Now, without further ado, I want to move us past my yakking and to some of the smartest humans that I know in this work. I get to introduce to some and remind others of some of the people that are doing the most incredible work, paying attention to all of the details of what's going on in the electoral cycle, and some friends of mine from several different organizations that are going to be talking to you about what's going on the ground. First, I'm going to introduce to you Judith Brown-Dianis, who you know from the Advancement Project, one of the world's best movement attorneys. I get to introduce you to Alex Aronson, the founder and executive director of Court Accountability. I get to bring up one of my dearest friends, Tarso Ramos, a longtime researcher and expert on the right wing, and Michelle Ming, who is the political director at United We Dream Action. Can y'all show some love for these incredible panelists? Give them some love, throw them some energy as they come to share their expertise with us. So, Judy, I'm going to start with you. So many of us are seeing burning drop boxes and the targeting of election workers, and are concerned about the right's tactics. You know, we've talked exhaustively about our remembering hanging chads and how we've all too often heard the lies from the right about stolen elections. So what we hear far less of is what to do to ensure that our vote and every vote gets counted. Can you tell us what Advancement Project is doing to ensure that that happens, and what we should know about how you're already defending us and what we need to be prepared to do?
Sure. Well, thank you. And it's good to be here. I just want to say that this community has been important to so many people, these mass meetings. We're really like digging in and learning a lot. So I want to thank you for holding this space. So again, Judith Brown Dianis from Advancement Project. So many groups, people may know we are a racial justice movement lawyering organization. We work with grassroots organizations across the country. Voting rights is like our thing. And so let me say a few things. I think that number one, what we are seeing in this election is when I think about like the tools of choice of voter suppression, they change every election cycle, right? There's like a through line on the theme, right, of like who they're going to target and why they're going to get people off, particular people off the rolls. But the game changes a little bit, right? They upgrade the game so that they can come with a different thing that we're not expecting. So the things that we have been fighting this year, one is the removal of voters from the voter rolls by the state. So people may have heard, you know, we filed this case in Virginia against the governor who was taking off people that were so-called non-citizens and doing it within this 90-day window where they're supposed to stop taking people off the rolls. And they were saying that these folks are non-citizens, when in fact, many of them are citizens, but maybe didn't check off a box on their driver's license application. And so we won in the district court in Virginia, and then was affirmed in the Fourth Circuit. And then, you know, you go to the Supreme Court, and SCOTUS did what SCOTUS does, which is the Trump MAGA appointees decided to stay the decision of the lower courts, which means that those people are being removed. It's a little over 1,600 people who are being removed, and there's nothing we can do about it except those people, thank goodness for the work of grassroots groups like New Virginia Majority, who changed the law in Virginia so people can actually register on election day and during early voting, register and vote. So thank goodness for that. But we'll be fighting that case. So we have that case. We also have a case around the other thing that's being used is really this going after people, individuals, and the Republican Party going after individuals and saying they're not eligible to vote. So those are voter challenges is what we call them. That is a thing. One thing I want to tell people is like Georgia, they are using voter challenges. They're still challenging people. There are lists of people coming in. I think Gwinnett County had like 5,000 people, or DeKalb County. Gwinnett is still removing people from the rolls. Basically, they have sent out these Republican operatives to look at addresses, to do AI matching, to see if people live where they say they live, and they are using that as flimsy evidence to get them off the rolls. So one thing to think about when we are looking at these issues is that a lot of these folks are going to be pushed into provisional ballots. So Ash, like you and I remember doing that curing process, right? We need a whole army of people who are going to be ready to do a chase of those voters who have been pushed into provisional ballots, because they'll have a very short window of time to provide the information they need to have their ballots counted. And so that's going to be real, especially in states like Georgia. The other thing that we're seeing, of course, is the fights over absentee ballots, right? When are they coming in? Were they postmarked on time? Are they coming in after the election? And Republicans are clear, like they want to, if it's not here by election day, They don't think it should be counted. So that fight is going to continue. And then there's the post-election, which is the certification issues. We just had a hearing in a case in Virginia, which is pre-election for a certification issue, where two deniers on a board of elections in Waynesboro County, Virginia, basically decided that we're not going to certify the election unless there is a hand count. That is not required under Virginia law. But they said that they don't believe that the machines can do it. And so we are in court, and we'll hopefully have a decision in the next day or so about those two deniers. And we're trying to get the court to force them to do it. So certification issues and count issues will be the post-election issues. So I think, again, I'll wrap it up, but I just want folks to know we're going to have a cure period. The other thing is, if you have organizations, one of the things I've been talking about, because I was in that 2000 election and I was a lawyer in the case representing the NAACP, is we're going to need bodies to help us do investigations. We're going to need people, right? So after election day, it may not, it's not going to be over, but we're going to need people to help us dig up the evidence of what has happened. And then lastly, I think, the other thing I would say is, go to these court hearings, sit in these courts, man. I went to the one in Virginia to watch my team in that court. It was a Black woman judge, and I wanted to sit there and be like, I see you, you see me, I see you. We have to show up in these hearings so that they know these are real people who are voting and real people whose votes are getting stolen. So please be present, and not just inside the courthouse, but do some picketing and some actions outside the courthouse too. Thanks.
Judy, we love you, and shout out to Advancement Project for 25 years of incredible service. We're grateful for you. For folks that are wondering how you can find out where to sign up to be a part of that army to cure these ballots that Judy was talking about, if you've texted mass call to 30403 and you are RSVPing for these mass calls, I promise you will get the call to action for those signups as soon as we've gotten them. And yeah, give it up one time for Judy and Advancement Project. We're so grateful for you. Alex, I want to come your way. Judy was talking about the courts, and court accountability has been educating many of us about the importance of paying attention to and building strategies around the courts since 2023. Y'all have been investigating, calling out, and trying to get social movements to fight against the ethics violations of judges and so many other things. There's been lots of conjecture about the role that the courts could play to steal the election. Give us a little bit of tea, like what's true, what's not true, and what should we do and not do in response?
Thanks so much, Ash. I'm thrilled to be here. What an honor. Thanks for everything that WFP is doing. You guys are really inspiring. Yeah, I'm here from Court Accountability, Alex Aronson. We work to combat judicial corruption and abuse of power, in part by helping to uncover the cabal of influencers, right? The theocrats and billionaires that have spent decades now building power and influence to try to reshape the courts, and who have successfully now put their cronies on the bench. And we've got these 6 justices who, I think Judy rightly described as MAGA justices who, as we've seen this year, have reliably handed down rulings to advance Trump's interest, making sure that he could get back on the ballot in Colorado, delaying and then ultimately reaching that immunity decision that completely gutted checks and balances and effectively laid the groundwork for Trump to become king. And then, of course, today's decision that Judy got into, clearly tipping the scales for Trump, a blatant violation of the National Voter Registration Act. I think it's, taking a step back, it's important to recognize that all of this stuff that we're talking about today and this capture operation of the court is the sign of a desperate political movement that has lost the support of the people, right? You talked, Ash, about how Trump is weak and insecure. All this stuff about, creating, disinformation and chaos around election security, this whole quote unquote election integrity movement. It's the manifestation of a huge minority position that knows that its day is done unless it can rig the game. This idea of a little secret that's because they're losing. And I think we need to recognize that and not get too alarmed about these plans, as scary as it is, as much as the justices have shown them they are in the tank for Trump. Because I think, by manifesting our majority, our power to stand up against this, it weakens their ability to get away with it. To get into your question about the court's power, of course, the court has a lot of power. But they had this attempt last time, right? There was a Stop the Steal one. I think we're in some important contextual differences now. The first time they tried this, it was a last-ditch effort, produced by fringe actors like John Eastman and Jeff Clark. It wasn't very well planned. I think at the end of the day, when the court didn't sustain those challenges, although they let them go long enough to allow January 6th to transpire, they kind of wanted to get rid of Trump. I don't think they found Trump to be a reliable ally in the broader project that they are on the court to achieve, the theocratic, anti-regulatory, anti-tax, pro-oligarchy agenda that they are pursuing. And we saw over the past 4 years just how much they had to accomplish around those goals, right? Ending women's reproductive freedom, eroding democracy even further through greenlighting more voter suppression and flooding our political system with even more money and dark money. And of course, this year, destroying the ability of public agencies and the government to protect our clean air and water and other freedoms. Those, I think, remain the big picture agenda of this court. And I think we need to think about those longer term objectives when we think about what the court can and might do this year. So that said, we're not in the same position we are when they heard those challenges. This year, they've accomplished a lot of those goals. Instead of that last minute fringe effort, we've got over $140 million being funneled into Trump's and the coordinated dark money efforts to seed this distrust and, prefabricate these claims of election integrity issues. It's all the same folks behind Project 2025 and the folks that have funded the capture and weaponization of the court. And I think the justices themselves are in a little bit of a different posture too, right? I think because of that overreach, because of the massive popular backlash to their abuse of power, their attacks on freedoms, their rulings for the wealthy few, and the corruption, I think they feel themselves weakened a little bit. But also, they could be like a caged animal where they could take this opportunity. And I think that's what we've seen in these other Trump cases this year, doing everything in their power to help rig the game for Trump. But I think one important context coming back to that longer term plan is that at the end of the day, if there is a sweeping and decisive Harris victory, it will be very, very difficult for the court to step in and overturn it. There's too much at stake. The billionaires that have backed them, who have real interests in social stability and market stability, if they're in a position and called to overturn an election that the broad populace of the huge majority of America recognizes as a Harris victory, I think it will be very difficult for them to do it, which gets to what you were talking about, Ash, which is the importance of, staying grounded, claiming that victory, projecting the inevitability of Harris taking the oath of office on January 20th. And as Judy encouraged, keep pushing, don't give up, find places to engage and defend that victory. Thanks so much again.
Y'all give it up one time for Alex Aronson and the Court Accountability Fam. If you haven't heard of them, please go check out their website. They're amazing and putting out incredible information that all of us that care about justice and democracy should be paying attention to. Thank you so much, Alex. Tarso, my friend, I want to bring you in. Can you talk a little bit about, we know that this is no new phenomenon, election subversion by the right wing. How can we get ourselves in a better position to recognize what's coming and prepare to act from our grounded and strategic place to block the right and build our power?
Yeah, thanks, Ash. This is I really want to thank the Working Families Party for hosting this excellent and really important mass call. I'm always down to throw down for the block and build. I'm Tarso Luis Ramos, and I've been researching supremacist, authoritarian, fascist groups for a few decades. Just to reiterate, it's clear that the MAGA bloc is trying to achieve permanent white minority rule in this country, and so there's a lot at stake. As Ash said earlier, this is once again a high potential election for election-related violence. In fact, there's already been some, including setting a ballot box afire in Southwest Washington, some other things. it's important to step back and just understand that leaders in the MAGA coalition have prepared their constituents, tens of millions of people, to believe that the electoral fix is already in motion and that patriotic Americans must prepare themselves to secure Trump's victory by any means necessary. That's the mindset. Now, this framing has special relevance for the organized sectors of the far right, militias, militant theocratic groups, and others, the kinds of groups that played an outsized role in the January 6th attack, both on the federal Capitol building and also, and we should remind ourselves, attacks that same day on a number of state capitals. But before getting to those groups, let's talk about the more general hardcore MAGA base. A recent poll finds that 22% of all Republicans, that's 8.5 million people, believe that, quote, if the 2024 presidential elections is compromised by voter fraud, everyday Americans will need to ensure the rightful leader takes office, even if it requires taking violent actions, right? 8.5 million people subscribe to that perspective. This is the universe from which the majority of likely far-right election disruptors would be drawn. About 85% of the people who were arrested for attacking the national Capitol on January 6th in 2021 had no identifiable affiliation with far-right groups. So there is this large, broader pool of recruits who will take their cues from MAGA leadership, from far-right media pundits like Alex Jones, Steve Bannon, and many others, and will be looking for who they should be attacking and what and where they should be doing that. Now, how do organized far-right movements see this moment? The most disciplined voter bloc in the MAGA camp is the Christian right, and they see this as an epic battle to win or lose the possibility of Christian nationalism. The most radical wing of this movement has been working on something they call Project 19. Now, you've heard a lot about Project 2025. This is Project 19. On the ground in 19 swing state counties where white evangelicals have underperformed at the polls and could, they believe, tip the balance in the election. Leaders of this movement, called the NAR, were active in January 6th, the attempted coup. Speaker Mike Johnson and Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito fly the Appeal to Heaven flag that's popularized by this movement, by the NAR. So not so fringe anymore as we would wish they would be. As noted earlier, Johnson and Alito could play outsized roles in determining the outcome of a contested presidential election if things are thrown to the courts or if things are thrown to a speaker intervention along the lines you were describing, Ash, earlier. So they're on the ground in all swing states, and NAR is a plausible source of election disruptors. Indeed, if there are alternative slates of electors, I would not be surprised if there weren't some NAR members who end up on those slates. They call Kamala Harris a demon and a candidate of the devil, and know that in this current environment of hyperbolic, right, rhetoric that we hear all the time, like every day, the outrages that are coming from Trump as a candidate have kind of inured us to this. It just sounds like really overheated rhetoric. They mean it literally. They mean it literally that Kamala Harris is a Jezebel and is a demon and is an agent of the devil, and they're calling their people into an existential fight. So they believe the stakes are that in order to do God's work, in order to prevent evil from capturing the United States, they must defeat Kamala Harris and ensure Trump's election by any means at their disposal. Now, I want to talk about, away from the Christian right, some of the far-right militias and so forth. Some of those groups that were most prominent in January 6th have suffered leadership arrests and other problems. Woe is them. Still, a recent report analyzed over 100,000 Telegram messages in the American Patriot 3%ers ecosystem. The 3%ers is one of the largest kind of open source militia networks in the country. These 3%er militia types will almost certainly join partisan poll watchers closely associated with the GOP, and may be hard to distinguish on the ground because they're being told not to use militia garb or insignia. So when Judith was talking about challenging, voters and that kind of thing at the polls, we should expect that there will be militia members involved in those activities. We certainly are aware that they were active in the disruptions at polling places in 2020 in Arizona and some other places. There were some 44 incidents of far-right ballot box gatekeeping in 2022 that we know of, mostly in Arizona and Pennsylvania. According to one study, given how intense and how close this election is, we should expect significantly more of that kind of activity going forward through this season. The United Sovereign Americans, which is a far-right election denial outfit, has been working to try to convince local officials that their election systems are compromised and that they need outside auditors to come in. Recently, Clackamas County, Oregon commissioners took this group's accusations seriously, sowing distrust there. We could see a lot more of that happening locally. I want to close with make a few comments about likely targets. So far, and you mentioned this earlier, Ash, in the 2024 election, the most common targeting has been directed at election officials themselves and other public officials perceived to be associated with elections, especially women and people of color in these roles. Harassment, threats, attacks against public officials have increased a lot since the fourth quarter of last year. The trend lines and historical comparisons suggest they will likely increase significantly more, particularly in the immediate aftermath of elections. So ballot sites, counting stations, or especially in swing states, but not solely, are likely to be areas of contestation. You mentioned as meetings of state electors on December 17th as potential targets. I endorse that sense that that's a vulnerability. There are, of course, other named enemies of the far right. In MAGA world and in Trump-led narratives about non-existent voter fraud, right? Immigrant voter fraud, communist conspiracies, woke mobs, Haitian immigrants, the enemy within. This kind of messaging tell potential violent actors who to target. In some cases, that will be strategic, directed at the election process itself, but we should be aware that as we're putting our people in the streets and there will be maybe need to mobilize to defend legitimate electoral outcomes, that we have to exercise some common sense security, right, as we mobilize to ensure that we defeat the MAGA fascists and authoritarians at the ballot box. Also, as noted earlier, we should assume that there'll be some surprises ahead, right? We can't know all the things that they may plan or that may emerge as new tactics as they move forward through what could be a sustained period. So let's all stay vigilant, stay in contact, and use common sense security as we move into this period and do what we need to do.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Tarso. Can we show some love to Tarso in the chat through your reactions? Thank you. Michelle, last but certainly not least, I need you to come and speak a word to our people. One way the GOP attempts to unfairly influence elections in their favor is spreading misinformation, and they are so obviously prepping to blame immigrants among other targeted communities, as Tarso just mentioned, post-election. What's the impact of this been on United We Dream Action Space, and what are folks doing in UWDA to block the right and build people power despite these nefarious efforts?
Yeah, well, we are doing a lot. I do want to preface, thank you, WFP, for having me. I am based out of New York and was very happy to early vote this afternoon on the WFP line and telling all my friends to do the same. So that's been really great. But United We Dream Action is an immigrant advocacy organization that is led by young people. It's a political home for young people, and because of who we represent, we're obviously really acutely aware of the dangers of these lies that Republicans are spreading. I do want to preface by clarifying that there is a difference between misinformation and disinformation. You might hear both terms thrown out a lot. With misinformation, the intent is innocent. With disinformation, it's an intentional lie. So when I accidentally tell my friend that I think World Series Game 5 is tomorrow, when it's actually going on right now, that's misinformation. It was a total accident. Republicans say that immigrants are fraudulently voting in elections. That's disinformation. It's intentional, and it's really, really harmful. So obviously there are robust processes in place to ensure that our elections are secure. That's why we have election rules. That's why we have poll workers, election judges, and so much more. So let's be clear. When Trump and his allies are spreading lies around voter fraud ahead of this election, they're laying the foundation for undermining our democracy if he loses. In fact, literally all the way back in July, Donald Trump Jr. said that Democrats can only win this November by cheating, which sounds exactly like what Republicans said before the January 6th insurrection. It also sounds like they just don't know how to lose. Republican politicians have also specifically been pointing the finger at immigrants for undermining our democracy, which is also, again, not a new thing. This is exactly the type of language that emboldens white supremacists. We're preparing for far-right extremists to incite violence if Trump loses. And Black and brown people will be at the very first line of attack, just as our people were in the mass shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Buffalo, New York, that were inspired by Trump's anti-immigrant and racist vitriol. Republican lies lead to violence. So it's our job as organizers and leaders to fight back against disinformation around our elections and literally just ensure a peaceful transfer of power, which still feels so ridiculous to say. But while our communities are victims of hateful disinformation against us, the people within our communities, our friends, peers, family members, are also among the most susceptible to disinformation, especially on social media and other online networks. That's why, as part of our block and build strategy this election year, we launched our first of its kind gamer intervention program, where we work with some of the top pro-immigrant influencers in the gaming world to spread accurate election information, share positive rhetoric and stories about immigrants, and also to create virtual spaces that directly counter the sense of division that Trump is creating. Young men, in particular, are targets of Trump's radicalization. And through this Gamer Project, we're meeting young men where they spend their time on games like Fortnite, FIFA, Elden Ring, Rocket League, and so many more. And if you're a gamer or have a gamer in your life, you know that that's a lot of time, ample opportunity for us to talk to these folks. We're also doing the work to pre-bunk this disinformation as much as we can. We've contacted 1.2 million young people this year to empower them to vote. And we're hopping on calls like this one to inform people like you about right-wing lies like this, so that when we hear them, we not only know how to call them out for what they are, which is, excuse my language, undemocratic bullshit, but also so that we can build immunity against these lies. It's really important to remember that we've been here before, we've seen how these lies play out before, and we prepared for all possible outcomes of the election to protect our people. Our communities are a constant reminder that our greatest resources against the threats that we face are each other. Together, we're being bold, courageous, and public with our support for immigrants now and in the future. And I can't stress this enough. I'm going to leave you with this message. We have to see our futures and our freedoms as deeply interconnected. We have to recognize that the attacks against immigrants, queer people, women, Black and brown people are more than just attacks against one group. They're direct attacks against all of us. We can't allow Trump to divide our people. We know what he's trying to do, and we're ready to defeat him together.
Y'all can do better than that. I need y'all to be in the chat and in the emojis, giving it up one time for Michelle Ming. I mean, first of all, she brought the heat, she brought the fire. She told us really concretely what we ought to be doing right now. She reminded us that solidarity is the way we're going to win this thing. And she talked, how many of y'all knew the difference between misinformation and disinformation? News to me. How many of y'all knew that you could pre-bunk that lies that these folks are telling? Because we know what they're about to do. Can we give it up for Michelle? Can we give it up for Alex? Can we give it up for Tarso? Can we give it up for Judy? Thank them for not regarding it robbery to share their brilliance with us tonight. We love you so much. Thank y'all so much for being here with us. Now, I know we got to close this call, and it's always hard because there's so much that we want to learn. There's so much that we want to hear from our people about. But we can't have the last mass call before Election Day and not get a word from the People's Party leader. So I get to turn the mic over to my friend, my comrade, my party leader, the National Director of the Working Families Party, Maurice Mitchell. Come on in the room, Mo.
Ash, thank you so very much. And could everybody please give Ashley Woodard Henderson her flowers, please, for supporting us, for holding us, for ministering to us, for providing a space for meaning for us, for helping us to metabolize our anxiety into action. We see you, we see your leadership, we see your voice, you inspire us, you lead us, and we thank you. This is Maurice. It's so good to be with you all. Thank you so much, Judy. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Tarso. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you all so much, everybody, for hanging out with us tonight. Because with 6 days left, every moment counts. Calls like this are the heartbeat of this movement. But these calls are not just, they're not just like a vibe or a moment to hear inspiring words, right? Your job isn't to be a spectator. This isn't a show. These calls are a call to action. This is an organizer call. Last week, we spent some time together highlighting the impressive ways you have already shown up, right? We need to remind ourselves that we're in motion. We shouted out thousands of new volunteers. We have thousands of new volunteers that have been generated just through these calls. The thousands of actions we have taken in critical swing districts for the presidential election and battlegrounds where the control of Congress is at stake. And we showed love to the wolf packs. Give it up to all of our wolf packs across the country in Florida, in Oregon, in North Carolina, in California, in Texas, in Louisiana, in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, that have gathered in person and virtually and organized to send more than 3,000 selfie postcards to voters, hundreds of thousands of text messages, knocked on doors, and made thousands of phone calls. We see you, we salute you. Can we celebrate one more time the incredible work of Seed the Vote? Overall, Seed the Vote is on track to knock 500,000 doors. I'm going to say it again. Seed the Vote is on track to knock 500,000 doors, possibly talking to enough voters to swing this election because the margins will be that close. But we need more to make sure we can reach that goal, to do everything we could do to make sure that we win. And I wish I could tell you that with 6 days out, that all of your efforts before were sufficient and that we could just ride the momentum. But tell no lies. I can't say that. And I can't tell you what your self-care practice should be, but I could tell you what mine is. When I'm feeling this anxiety, when I'm scrolling on the internet, when I'm watching the news, when I'm looking at the polls, the thing that helps you metabolize this anxiety is action. My self-care is action. My self-care is organizing in these moments of high anxiety. And you might want to try that on as well. Look, we also talked about, if you remember, what time it is on the clock of this country, right? There's a whole lot of noise, and I'm sure you hear all the noise everywhere, in group chats, online, and there are outright lies. We already heard, Michelle talked about the misinformation, disinformation, outright lies. Some pundits are out here saying Michigan is lost. Black men are lost. Immigrants, whatever, you name it. They said similar things in 2018, in 2020, and again in 2022. And they were wrong. They were wrong then, and they are wrong now. Let them keep running their mouths. Your job, my job, is to stay disciplined. We don't organize to follow the narrative. We organize to change it. So for this entire year, we've been talking about the dual mandate to block Trump and build for working people, not just in this election, but we're building a party that earns our people's respect and their vote. We're building that party county by county, state by state, city by city. And I'm deeply proud and inspired by the ways we're holding together right now, refusing to fracture, refusing to allow the right wing and the haters to wedge us. If we keep this up, we will end this year stronger than we ever have been. So you might be asking, how can I take action? Well, let me tell you. There's many ways to take action in this moment. Number one, if you haven't already, I am asking you to join the Working Families Party. It's very easy. If you feel a connection to the shared political commitment, if you feel a connection to everything we've said today, if you believe in the crazy idea that in a democracy, the people should govern and not corporations, then welcome, you are a part of the Working Families Party. You just haven't made it official yet. So let's do that. If you're already a member, consider becoming a dues-paying member. And WFP is not an organization. It's not one organization. It is a party built of grassroots organizations, of activists like you, all around the knowledge that the two-party system is not working for working people, and we must strategically build a party that can ensure working people thrive and not just survive. If that is what you know, what you believe in your heart, join us today. You can join today by going to WFP.org/join. wfpus.org/member. Join today. Join the thousands and thousands and thousands of others who've already picked up the mantle of WFP and enjoyed this shared political commitment. Now, next, another action you could take. This is an organizing call. We came here for action, am I right? So another action you could take. We need everyone, everybody who's listening to me, to deploy to a swing state if you don't live in one. In-person interactions are going to be the most effective. So if you can figure out how to get yourself off work, please do so. See, the vote is still taking signups for Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Arizona, and Michigan. If you're watching this online, you could text the word mass call, that's MASSCALL, to 30403. Text mass call to 30403 to get all these links. And we'll also drop the links in the chat for those of you that are in the chat. Now, you might be thinking, that's a pretty big ask. I might have to take off work. I might have to change my schedule. I might have to make some sacrifices in order to move from wherever I am to swing state. And I understand that. And this is a time for sacrifice. This is a time for us to sacrifice our time, our testimony, some of our treasure, so that we could collectively, in a collective strategy, get over the finish line. I want to remind folks that in 2020, Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump in Pennsylvania with 81,660 votes. I want to alert you to another number in Pennsylvania, 83,616. That 83,616, those are all the voters that voted for Kendra Brooks as the working family only at-large city council member in the city of Philadelphia. The reason why I say that is all of our voters in Philadelphia, if we're able to reorganize the Kendra Brooks coalition, can make a significant dent in what will be a close margin of victory. We need to get to them. We need to talk with them. We need to be at their doors and their neighbors and many others who are on the fence. And there's still opportunities to have those conversations. I'll be in Pennsylvania, I'll be in Wisconsin, and I'll be in Arizona before the dust is settled this weekend, right? So I'm not asking you to do anything that I am not doing myself. I'm going to be on that turf talking to working class people. Now, if for whatever reason you don't have the ability to move or you can't take off from work, we're gonna give you this work. We got this work for you. So join us on the phones. If you can't deploy physically, sign up for a phone bank. Surge, WFP, and the Carolina Federation have signups available now. So nobody here should leave this conversation unchanged. It's the job of organizers to move people into actions that they otherwise wouldn't do. We would have failed you if you experienced this call unchanged. If you experienced this call untransformed, I would not be doing my job. The way that we know that you've been transformed is that you picked up an action that you otherwise would not have done. A phone bank, a deployment into the swing states, right? And so you could click any of those links and you could do that immediately. And lastly, build a wolf pack. Build a wolf pack. You can join and organize with your friends, family, and coworkers, a small group of people in order to get this work, to get on the doors, to get on the phones, to text bank together and build community. It is not too late to make a difference. It is not too late. Don't become a political spectator in the political arena of political sport. Be a political agent. Be out in the arena. You could be out in the arena with a crew through the Working Families Party by doing any of these activities. Don't simply get lulled into becoming a pundit. You see all that punditry online? That punditry online could lull us into feeling like we're not agents, that somehow there are actions outside of us that are determining the outcome of this election. We're looking at the polls. Put those polls down. Put those polls down, pick up a clipboard, and talk to a voter. That is the mandate between now and Election Day. I encourage you I more than encourage you. I'm telling you that when all is said and done, we could rest easy. We could rest easy knowing that we've done our level best if we put in this work. What I don't want for you is Tuesday or Wednesday or any day after Election Day, you turn around and have a wonder or a doubt of whether or not you've done enough. I know I don't want that doubt, which is why I plan to do my level best to spend every hour I can engaging with working class people in critical places where I know it matters, where people are still wrestling with the contradictions, are still wondering who's going to take care of them and their family, who are still trying to piece it together, who still need to understand the policy contrast. And they don't believe in politicians or the two-party system, but they can believe in their neighbors. They can believe in people that they could see and touch and talk to. That's you. You are the front lines for this democracy. You, me, all of us. It's not about your single vote. It's about what we do collectively. So we need you to vote and we need to organize. That is the mandate over these next 6 days. We thank you. We see you. Let's get the job done.
Well, y'all heard our party leader. Did you get the mandate? Are you ready to stay grounded, mind, body, and spirit, with your eye on the prize and your hand on the freedom plow? We ready to finish this thing out like the champions that we are, like we were, in fact, born to win, that we were born to be the agents that bend the moral universe towards justice? It's you, it's us. So, okay, y'all, we've once again come to the end of another powerful evening. Thank you, every single one of you, the speakers, and every single person that made these calls possible. Remember that we are in the thick of the fight right now, and the feelings that you're feeling are completely and entirely natural. I hope that if nothing else happened on this call for you, that it reminded you that you're not alone. You're not by yourself. We've said since April that everything about the conditions in which we're doing this work contributes to splitting us apart from one another. And though we may disagree on many things, we need each other now and on November 5th and in the months and years that are going to follow. In this moment and for always, let us lean into the practice of struggle and unity. Where the right prioritizes fragmentation and fear and hate, let us prioritize principled struggle, hope, faith, and solidarity. Our belief in our people and our solidarity helped stop overt election subversion in 2020. We can do that again. My friends, now is the time to see it done, to make it so. As we leave this call today, let's remember that we need to hold a couple of things in our head at the same time. We're in a sprint to November 5th, and we're on a long haul march to build power over the next 5, 10, 15, 25 years. We're in a generational struggle as much as we're in rapid fire, get out the vote. This is the double tempo that we have to play and the power that we are responsible to build. Hearing that plan only confirms what I mentioned last week, that we are up against some powerful adversaries, principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places. But this is not the first time that we or our ancestors have fought this fight. As we leave this call, we're even more clear on the nature of what it is we have to block and the kind of power that we have to build. Remember, our next mass call is November 7th at 8 p.m. Eastern. Check the mobilized link to RSVP for mass calls that we've added to the calendar to be prepared to make meaning of what's happening together post-election, and so that we can be on the ready to take calls to actions from the ground. And for folks that have Instagram, if you're tempted to doom scroll all day, be on the lookout for some IG lives from WFP and special guests throughout the day. Come see for yourself what folks you can trust are up to on Election Day. And remember, your election survival toolkit should include staying grounded, staying joyful, staying connected, and resisting the temptations to fracture or spread disinformation. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you all in this life-saving work. Let's go win this thing. See you on Election Day.